Okay. I'm Martin. Hi.
I'm Tori Mac.
I'm Diego.
I'm Amanda.
And we are going to be discussing the piano in race and clothing. So how would we like to start?
Well, I just thought it was interesting. I think the clothing and the race aspects really very like interconnected, and obviously like they both have their own like very in-depth meanings to the movies, but they do interconnect in a really interesting way. So during this time period, like the Victorian era, they thought of nature very differently to how we think of nature. So these days we think of nature as like this place that we go to like relax. It's like kind of like this like spiritual this kind of spiritual like refuge for us. But back then, basically nature was this like kind of like this like it was like this place to be like combated. Like it was this place like man versus wilderness. Like even like the word like bewildered is literally it means you're bewildered, you're like lost in the woods, like it's a negative connotation. And so that negative connotation, nature being like this like savage, violent place, was associated with native people and people that weren't white. And that's like something that's carried over in a weird way to today, because for example, like today, sorry, my head's like not showing. Today will be like people will be like, oh, I'm like, you know, like 0.7% Cherokee. I'm like in like spiritually like connected with like the trees outside. Like I have like spiritual connection to the grass. Like, you know, everyone knows someone like that. They'll like always say something like that. So it's the same type of thing of like this like stereotype of like people of color and especially native people being connected to the wild and nature in ways that, you know, white people are. It's like this very like Eurocentric idea. And so I think that was interesting because in the movie, you would always see these like Victorian era, very European clothing, and it would always be conflicting with the nature in the shot. So like the way she's running and she's tripping over all the roots with her like her massive dress, and just the way like it's like his like pants get all like everyone's pants get all muddy. Like it just, you can see that like those clothes are just like in like direct conflict with the wildlife, which is like very symbolic of like these Eurocentric ideas and like the conflict with the native peoples and just all of that. So I did notice that, especially with her when she's like walking through the mud, and it's just yeah, no, and there was like, I remember there's this one scene where she like pulls out a wooden board to like try to walk across the mud, and then they just end up walking through all the mud anyway. And I thought, I don't know why that scene stuck with me, but yeah.
Yeah, I definitely feel that when it comes to the portrayal of the natives in this film, they were definitely portrayed as almost barbaric. They seemed to be, for example, when Flora's telling Ada that they're using her piano in the way that they're just, for no reason, they're just being super aggressive with the piano and they're just messing around with it, even at times when they were told not to, and just the way they're behaving, it's like they don't know anything. And the show, when for some reason they didn't realize it was pretend, they thought that she was actually being her, and they just run up the stage and they just run to go attack the guy. Like, that was interesting. I think maybe that wasn't to show a lack of intelligence as to what assume, but it definitely showed that this is something to make them seem comedic, but not in a good way. Definitely not.
Well, I think comedic is interesting because I think actually the main comedy relief came from the lower class white servants, which is also something you could say about how comedy is directed at people that have less privilege. Because I did honestly think it was kind of funny. I really liked her, the kind of like the dorky maid that was always like copying what the other woman was saying. But no, I totally get what you're saying. They were portrayed as very like, I think I want to go like one step further beyond like kind of like what you were saying, very like childish. very like almost like imps. Like that's the word that comes to mind. Like these kind of like these like mischievous imps, which is like I feel like how the Eurocentric eye kind of like gazes upon native peoples as either like these like savages or like these kind of like little like children basically. And I think that's kind of how they were portrayed in this film. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I think this can be seen like even in like the beginning of the movie. Like when what's his name, Stewart, and the rest of the natives first show up at like the beach. They're Stewart is talking to Ada, and there's one of the natives in the background just kind of like mocking him, and it just kind of like it's interesting because I don't really understand like the purpose of that, like other than to show like I don't know, just like maybe some sort of like comic relief, but also to set the tone for like how they're kind of going to be acting for like the rest of the movie. And like even the way they dress is very similar to the way that Stewart dresses, how he has like the kind of fake top hat type of thing going on. And it's just kind of curious as like why they would have them like act so silly, like silly, I guess.
I also think the clothes are very like her clothes in particular are very they have like a very like they have a sexual energy. Like we can't like ignore that. It's very much like a symbol of like certain like eroticism in the movie. I mean, and then when you think about that and how that conflicts with like the surrounding wildlife, and then you think about how the surrounding wildlife is almost like representative of like European views of native peoples, then it's almost as if that's making commentary on the conflict between views on like sex between these different cultures. I feel like I'm not wording it right, but like you guys got what I'm saying, kind of, right? Like it's kind of
Yes.
like this like and I remember someone in our class brought up the that one person, that one native dude, he was like sitting on the branch and there was like an allusion to like him being like bisexual, and that's like something that would be like completely like not even like heard of in like the Victorian time. Like if you said that you were like a possessed like like
Yep.
horrible like monstrosity of gods, like
Like they said
so
demons were in you.
such like a contradiction. And then I think it's interesting that Baines is like this like white dude that's like kind of like tried to like embrace that culture and seems to be a more sexually like open than Stewart, who's like this very Eurocentric, like Victorian era dude. But yeah, I think that there is a lot of commentary on like how Eurocentric like Victorian era views on sexuality are like repressed and unnatural and conflicting with what is normal and natural and right. And I think that's interesting.
I would also like to point out how Ada kind of takes her clothing in a sense, and while it is used to make her feel less, as was mentioned in class, how she ended up taking the hoop of the skirt and making it like a little hut for her and Flora to sleep in, and how so she takes something that was used to almost sexualize her and makes it her own, makes it something safe for her, makes it something that shows how, for example, like her connection, how it demonstrates how close she is to Flora and the love for each other.
Well, I think it's interesting because I think it's like completely the opposite. Like that's not meant to sexualize her. It's meant to like cover her up completely. Like you
Yeah.
cannot see her legs. You cannot even see like a imprint of her legs, just like this big skirt. Like that's and then I think the main purpose of that is, I know we were talking about how why is she bringing all of this cooking equipment when they have servants? And the reason I believe is because it's just a way to like keep her in her place. Like that is how like you keep her in her role. And that's very like that's basically what those skirts are. Like
Yes.
very in a very physical sense. Like she can't run, she can't like she's very constrained. It's like a physical symbol of like oppression. She's stuck in like this big skirt and that's still something that happens a lot today, and just
Yeah.
but yeah, that's why I think I wanted to mention that, but we ran out of time. But yeah, it's like a shackles.
Yeah, that actually, I think that makes it even better. How like it like puts her in her place, but she makes it into something else, something that is comforting for her. And I like
Mhm.
that.
I think the like the visualization of I guess all the stuff that she brought ashore with her. I think it could be like, I don't know what I forgot what the word is. It's slipping my mind, but it could be like a representation of like literal like emotional baggage that society can place on her, and how like the expectations of her were to be like working in a kitchen and like being a housewife due to like the time period and her being a woman. And I think it can be visualized as like literally emotional baggage that she has to carry around, just like along with her when she doesn't like have to, since they have it where she's going. I don't know how to word it because it kind of just popped into my head, but
Mhm.
I think it kind of, I think you understand what I'm trying to say.
Mhm.
What
I'm
other
looking through my
points come to
notes. I'm
mind?
just, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just asking all of you, what other points come to mind? Like even if race, clothing, or maybe something else that can allude to that. Any ideas?
I think definitely like just like a big thing I've noticed throughout the film is like her facial expressions. There's both nothing there and like and also so much there at the same time. Like she kind of just has this blank stare all the time, but you can see like little vague differences depending on like what's happening, if that makes any sense. And that like really like ties into the fact that she can't speak, and like so she already has trouble expressing her emotions. Does that make any sense?
No, it does make sense. I think that maybe that really emphasizes like the repression of desire and just emotion, because I think that's probably very much how, like, I think she seems like she comes from a very, like, pretty well-to-do, wealthy estate. uh if we were like looking at like the opening sequences of the movie, like she seemed like she came from a pretty wealthy family. So I think maybe that might have been like part of like how she's been taught to socialize, like kind of like very like demure almost. um but yeah, no, I did notice that a lot. It was like almost like a lot of the emotion wasn't in her face, it was in her movements, it was in her actions, and it was also in her piano playing, which I think um is interesting.
Coming back to the natives, actually. Something I immediately noticed when watching the film was how the movie did not go out of its way to subtitle what they were saying or even try to give, when they were speaking in their language, it didn't even try to give like any connotation to what they were saying. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. What do you guys think?
I think that was 100% purposeful,
Mhm.
because it makes them feel even more separate from
Exactly.
the European characters. Makes them feel even more like alien, basically. Which is not my words to describe them. I'm just thinking about like how they would be viewing them. But yeah, I think that was definitely a purposeful choice.
I'm wondering if like the director like purposefully like tried to make them seem this way as like trying to make like the indigenous people like kind of, I don't know what the word is. Like was she doing this to them
I
on
think
purpose?
so. Yeah, I mean, I
But
think
like
there were
I
like
like she
so
was
many like
definitely doing it on purpose, but I don't know if it was like in an actually derogatory way, I guess. Like if she was directly being derogatory out of just like dislike, or like because she wanted to emphasize like the white people more. Like could she have done a better job, or did she purposefully like try to like have a racist environment, if that makes sense.
And
She-
that's
I mean, well, this is just something not like a whole statement that I want to say. Just I don't think the characters even had names, did they? Like any
They
of like
didn't-
nope.
yeah, I don't think. It's just weird.
They were never really in the shots long enough to have like, I mean, there were like a few that, I think there was that older woman. She was in a lot of the shots. But yeah, kind of not really. And even her, she kind of like broke a lot of stereotypes of like what an older woman acts like. I think if I remember correctly, like she was very lively. You guys know who I'm talking about, right? The one
I
I'm
think
talking
so.
about. Yeah.
Mhm.
I think that was interesting too, but not really sure what that means.
Also, like they had like her daughter playing with them a lot, which I think adds like the idea of like those people were childish. And so like her child is gonna play with them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Something about I think the way that they made the indigenous characters, like I think like what you said earlier about how they were kind of used to maybe put the European characters on more of a pedestal. It kind of, or not pedestal, like maybe more focus on them. It
Like
made
a
me like
spotlight.
them a little bit less. Like maybe like the European characters a little bit less, just because like they had that kind of standing of just like I'm better than you in pretty much every scene, and I don't know, I didn't like it. It kind of like made me like put a bad taste in my mouth for most of the characters. So
That might have been like the director's like idea of trying to make them like less likable because it's obvious that they're on a higher level than the other people, I guess.
Well, I also think that the fact that like Ada and Stuart and are wearing like these like very like classical like Victorian very cumbersome clothes, and then the native people aren't really wearing any clothes, and they seem to be less like pulled down by these fears of like sexuality that the white characters are experiencing, especially like Ada and Stuart, who are always like tripping around in the woods, and they're like in her like skirt, and he's always like in like he looks really out of place among like the wild and like his like top hat. I think that's really just commentary on uh like what clothing meant in like the Victorian era in like relation to like sex and desire and yeah.
So when it comes to Baines and whether or not he's one of the natives or he just showed up, because he does not look like the rest of them, definitely, but he
Mhm.
clearly follows their traditions, speaks the language, he respects them clearly, and he has the markings on his face like the others. I did find that kind of confusing and interesting. Like Ada seems to see him as one of the natives. What do you guys take on this?
I thought it was interesting, well, because I maybe have like a bad eye for like this type of thing, but I actually thought he was one of them at first. Like I didn't think he was white. Like I was like, oh, like this is like, kind of like the ambassador between the Europeans on this island and the native people. That's what I kind of thought. And then as the movie progressed, I was like, oh wait, never mind. Uh yeah. So I was kind of unsure about that, but yeah, I guess.
I was definitely confused on that too. And I think definitely like, when he was introduced in the movie, I kind of automatically, not automatically, but I just kind of assumed that he was like maybe like I don't know, one of the natives with like a higher standing or like I don't know. But I definitely assumed that he was one of the natives, was on like I guess his physique and how he was a bit stronger and like how most of the natives also were represented in the same way. And he also had like a very clear kind of understanding of the terrain, and the markings on his face also like kind of helped like in that understanding. But I think as the story went on, it was, I guess, maybe revealed slowly that he wasn't. So
I mean, also
I
his,
don't know.
I feel like that maybe it wasn't the purpose to be revealed slowly. Like his name should have been a dead giveaway. Like his first name is like George, right?
Yeah.
George
Mhm.
Baines. So that should have been like a dead giveaway to like first. But yeah, I'm not sure.
That made me curious. I was honestly wondering if. Sorry, Zoom gave me a pop-up. I was wondering if he could have been, even though we didn't see any people who were like this, but I was wondering if he could have been like a mixed person, if he was like half European,
Mhm.
half one of the natives, like he had a parent from the other. We didn't hear anything about who his family is or anything.
Yeah, because I think it takes a lot. I heard someone talking about this, so I'm just, if they for some reason watch our conversation, thank you for enlightening me on this. But I heard it takes a lot. Like you really have, it takes a lot to get those markings. Like that's a very like sacred type of thing for like
Mhm.
most traditions that do like tattoos or like scarification. Like that's like you really have to be like, you have to devote yourself to that culture. Like you can't just go in like a tourist and be like, oh my God, like I want to be like, I don't know, like I don't know if they get markings. I want to be Cherokee now. And then just like go like to the local like tattoo, whatever TP and just like go get markings. Like that's not how it works. Like you need to really be part of that culture. So I mean, the fact that they did that and learn the language, I mean,
Mhm.
that's when I'd say like it's hard because like now in the like where we're living, cultural appropriation has like such a different meaning. So I'm not really sure what that would have felt like to people back then.
Mhm.
A white man learning of the native language and living with the native people and getting the markings and really like immersing themselves in that culture. Like I'm not sure what that would be called then. Now that would be kind of like, I don't know, maybe looked down upon. I'm not sure. Maybe people would be happy about it. They'd be like, oh, cultural appreciation because he's like, he's really immersing himself in the culture and he took the time to like learn this language, which is probably very difficult. And he obviously got the markings, which is kind of like a sign of like, I don't know. But yeah.
I think that the learning the language and getting used to the culture would have been like appreciated back in the day, but the markings coming back, that is a sacred thing. I don't think they'd feel very well about that part.
I think
Well, I do
the
want to say
idea.
someone gave those to him. Like he didn't give those to himself. So I
Yeah,
mean
exactly.
that's um
So that's
so
like
that's
coming back to the point that he probably definitely has been there like his whole life or something.
yeah.
Actually, the markings on his face are, I've noticed, are like less like intricate or less
Yeah,
detailed
they
than
are.
like,
They are. They definitely
Mhm.
are.
so I feel like he may have like given them to him himself, or like maybe like you're supposed to do it yourself. I don't know. I just like that definitely has something to do with it, that it is less detailed.
Oh yeah, no, definitely.
It kind of looks like a stick and poke type of thing, where the
Well, no,
rest
I
of
think it
them.
definitely it emphasizes that he doesn't really belong there, and he doesn't really belong with the Europeans. He's kind of nowhere. I think that might be what it
Mhm.
is, kind of, because he wears clothes, but not like the really nice clothes that like Stuart and Ada wear, and he has the markings, but just not like the intricacy or like it's kind of very like simple, like kind of like not like half done. Like it kind of
Mhm.
feels empty on his face. And I think that might be like that's what I was kind of getting the whole movie. Like he's kind of like an outsider in both worlds. Like he's not really part of any world, the Europeans or the native people of the New Zealand. Um, yeah.
That's what makes it overall very confusing. Like, is it appropriation or is it not? Because we don't know anything about him or where he's from. We don't know his story.
Mhm. I think appropriation is generally something that's like you don't put as much time into it. And I think learning the language is like alone something that's very hard to do, like learning a completely new language, which means that like this wasn't like kind of a spur of the moment thing, but also like spending a lot of time with these people in like the wilderness and also going through and getting these tattoos, which they look kind of faded, which means they're probably a little bit older as well. I think that means like he definitely like this isn't like a whimsical thing. Like he put a lot of effort and a lot of like part of his time and dedication into like learning more about like these people and their culture and like wanting to become like more like accustomed to it and like kind of growing into it a little bit. So that's kind of what I saw out of a lot of that.
I think that the trouble is the word appropriation, because right now that means like if like a white person adapted like a black accent for social media attention, right? And they were using like
Yeah.
African American slang and
Or even the hair.
yeah, and the hair and just mannerisms, and they were getting fame or attention or money off of that. And then when actual black people do it, they're looked down upon for it. They're like there's like, you know, they're scorned for speaking that way, but a white person can pick it up and drop it as like a facade. And that's what cultural appropriation means now. So like, or maybe like someone who's not Asian, being like, you know, like being like, I'm so feng shui, which like I'm using that purposefully because that is something they say when feng shui is like literally like it's like rearranging objects in your house for like energy or something. I'm not really sure what it is, but it has nothing to do with like Japanese culture, for example, or like Korean culture. I think it's like a Chinese thing. And they'll just kind of like throw around all these Asian terms and like pretend to be like very like, you know, like kawaii or like whatever. And getting maybe like attention for that, but they can drop that at any time. That's cultural appropriation. So this, I'm
Mhm.
not sure what this is because it's in a different time period. And I think that's like something that really needs to be thought about if we're talking about cultural appropriation, because like it wouldn't have been cool back then for a white person to like adopt the culture of a person of color. Like that just wouldn't have been cool. That would have been like frowned upon. So it's not like, I don't think he's gaining anything from this. He's not gaining social media attention. He's not gaining like, you know, he's not gaining like street style points. Like he ain't gaining anything.
And he hardly ever
So
leaves that area too.
yeah,
Mhm.
so I'm really not sure like what, and if he did, if he went, he would be probably, if he went back to like Europe, if he is from Europe, he'd be looked down upon for those tattoos and for not being able to, you know, for just probably not having like the mannerisms of the Europeans. Like that's just like he would be looked down upon. So I mean, I'm not sure what you'd call it. I don't know. Because it's very different. It's not the same now.
Mhm.
Another thing I noticed is that like Ada is like she's attracted to him, but like does she only like him because he like would she have, if he was fully native, would she have still like liked him the way that she does? I don't know if that like really makes any sense, but like I
Yeah,
feel
no, I was
like
thinking about that too.
Mhm.
if he had the same like personality as the rest of the natives, would she still like him the way she does? I mean, like
I
she
think
does
that
kind of have this like Stockholm syndrome thing going on, but like, would she have developed feelings for him if he was not white?
right. Well, I want to say because I think it's interesting because I don't think it's Stockholm syndrome. Actually, I think it's still creepy, but I don't think, because Stockholm syndrome is when you're being held hostage and you start to like develop like a bond, whether that's like emotional or sexual, with your captive, your captor. Um, he kicked her out. He wanted, and she came back, and but I don't. like I'm not sure if it was exactly Stockholm syndrome. I think it was more complicated than that. But then also back to the natives, they're very much like caricatures. Like they're not like they're not characters, they're not people, they're caricatures. And that's why I kind of like feel like when every scene they're in, that's why they're very over exaggerated. Like when he's like behind him, he's like making those faces, like that's very theatrical. Like it wasn't like a normal like thing. Like it was very, very theatrical, like the eye rolling, like it was very like reminiscent of like like those like older movies that had very like characterized versions of
Like the minstrel
minorities.
shows a little.
Mhm.
I also noticed that there was one point where like the natives were singing, like two of the native girls were just singing God Save the Queen for like no reason.
Yeah.
And during like the little theater thing they put on, they painted their faces white.
I did not notice
Like
that.
I
That's interesting.
like the little kids in that like little like group of like angel fairies or whatever, some of them had like face paint on and it was white.
Okay, I did not notice that. I didn't think they were even in the play actually.
They
which,
were they tried to make them blend in with like the
Interesting.
white children.
That is something
Mhm.
else.
Mhm.
Like it took me a minute to notice it too, but like like I'm not like trying to make things up. Like I'm pretty sure I did see that.
It would make sense now that I think about it. So yeah.
Like I don't think that Flora was the only white child there. I think.
No, she wasn't. There were other mothers, I think.
Mhm.
Look at how the maids were in the play too.
Right.
Race is generally depicted in a very confusing way throughout this film.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And it's really not clear what they're trying to say about the natives in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I might be out of stuff. Like, kind of.
Let me see. I think it was interesting how like a lot of the movie and kind of like one of the main focuses of the movie is about like, or maybe like kind of breaking down or at least like showing stereotypes like for women in Ada and how like, well, I don't know, I think a lot of like I think there's a lot of focus on stereotypes in the movie, yet like the natives are portrayed in a very like stereotypically not white way, in the way that like they're not white characters, so they get portrayed as like stupid and kind of idiotic, but like the movie is focused around like the problems that stereotypes can cause and like the impact that they can have on people. And I think it's interesting how like only the white characters are really, or I guess one white character is able to maybe break free out of said stereotypes.
In the opening like credits where like they show like all the types of directors, one of the roles is like the dialogue person that like wrote all the indigenous dialogue, and like it kind of like goes back to like how much effort like did they put effort in to like they didn't not put effort into like the appearance of the indigenous people, but were they purposefully like they had their actual language in there. Like I like one of my psych classes, like we learned Maori for some reason. Like they did speak like the actual indigenous language in New Zealand, but like I lost my train of thought. Okay.
You're good.
But like does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
I mean, I think going back to how like many of the characters didn't even have like names, I don't think they put too much thought into it. But I think it is interesting how like they have them speaking like the language properly, but like they don't. That's kind of like as far as they go, and that could maybe be like credited to like the actors themselves. Maybe just know how to speak it, and so like they kind of like maybe did that themselves, but I don't know. I think it's weird how they would have the language but not like names for the characters.
Do you guys have anything else or?
I think we have made some very good points in general throughout this.
Hmm.
And it is a very, maybe not so open-ended film, but it is definitely like something you can gather like different ideas from. And I feel like everyone will have a different thing to say about it.
Definitely.
All right.
Cool.
So I guess that concludes today's discussion.